How's everyone doing? Chris Lopez, your union brother on TikTok, Instagram, all the platforms. Welcome to the 51st episode of the Union or Bust podcast. We are over the hump trying to get to 100 here. And here is Organizing Monster.
Hey, everybody. Juan Perez here, Organizing Monster. We switched sides, and Chris is the one that intro today. Please subscribe to our YouTube, like it, subscribe, comment. Sign on to our Patreon, patreon.com/UnionorBust. Become a Patreon supporter. Anything counts. Everything helps. I want to introduce Lily Greenberg Call. She's one of the first people in the Biden administration to resign in protest because of the Biden administration's foreign policy, the Gaza genocide. So Lily, welcome to the Union or Bust podcast.
Thanks, y'all. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so how did it, one, of course, we want to know why did you end up quitting the Biden administration? What was the reason? How was it? What was the response? But also, let's start off with like your backstory. Where did you grow up? How did you end up in the Biden administration in the first place?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it, short and give the whole life story in a short clip. But I grew up here in San Diego. I grew up in North County. And was born in Orange County. We moved down here when I was 10. So, spent my adolescence here. And my parents met here, and they lived here, and then they moved us up to Orange County and then back. So I grew up here. Went to a Jewish school here in Carmel Valley, the San Diego Jewish Academy, and grew up in this like very conservative in many ways, although I didn't really realize it at the time, but like pretty conservative and very tight Jewish community. My mom is Jewish from New York, kind of the like very, my family is like two versions of the American dream in a lot of ways. Like my mom's parents came over here, immigrants, didn't go to high school, didn't speak English, worked like farm, they were farmers. They worked these like odd jobs. My grandpa was a salesperson, so he'd like go around to all the stores in the Lower East Side selling like soap and whatever, like laundry detergent.
A hustler.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah, it had to be. And then amazingly, like 2 generations later, I'm working for the President of the United States, and that's like a really, that kind of privilege. And that opportunity is something that I think my family like really took very seriously, and I grew up knowing that was like a level of opportunity that we wouldn't have necessarily had anywhere else, right? And then my dad's side came over like right around before America was a country, after the Mayflower type, that kind of OG settlers, right? And so very, very like different backgrounds that my family has. Like I could be in the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, if I wanted to, but they only just started being like chill with Jewish people and non-white people. So I don't really know that, that I feel
maybe it's a good
super connected, to that. But so his family like served in every war since the Revolutionary War. He was a veteran himself, Air Force, which is what brought him to San Diego originally. And so I think I grew up with this like sense of gratitude for this country and understanding like the serious problems and the history, and knowing the good and the bad, right? But the community I grew up in was very tight knit Jewish community. Went to day school, went to synagogue. I love being Jewish. It feels like a big important part of my identity, both like spiritually and religiously and culturally, and also, I think the reason I wanted to get into politics and public service was really rooted in that community, and a lot of the lessons I was taught about like making the world a better place than you found it, and that our responsibility, especially as people who've been through persecution and genocide, is to prevent those things from happening again to anyone, right, and not just us. And so when I was a kid, I started like knocking doors for campaigns here. I volunteered on Olga Diaz's race. She was running for mayor of Escondido. She would have been like the first female mayor of Escondido. I think first Latino, maybe Latina mayor for sure. She didn't win, but it was really inspiring, to be a part of that when I was like 13.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then I also like knocked doors for Scott Peters. He was one of the first people I ever knocked doors for when in one of his races, and I just was like really excited to get my hands on, any kind of activism that I could. And so I was doing that, and I started to like get involved with Young Democrats of America. And then I also, because of my community, was I was very pro-Israel growing up, and that was just like, there was no kind of question about that. It didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat. It didn't matter like, what, regardless of any of your other beliefs, like the way I was raised was to be supportive of Israel. It was, a place that I had a lot of family in. It was our second home is how we were taught to think about it. And, if you were Jewish and you cared about Jewish safety, then you were going to be pro-Israel. And so for me, as someone who's interested in politics, doing that politically was like a natural fit. So I got involved with AIPAC through my high school, which for people who might not know, AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And it is, I would say, probably the most like well-known Israel lobby in the country, although it's not necessarily the biggest. There's the CUFI, Christians United for Israel, has more members technically, but it's the face of like the pro-Israel lobby in the United States. And so when you're a 16-year-old and you're interested in politics, and AIPAC is there being like, we'll take you to DC, we'll teach you how to lobby, you can meet your Congress people, like that's really exciting. And so that's kind of how I got my start, like in learning about how things work in DC and going to those conferences and meetings and learning how to like go to the Hill and meet with my member of Congress and ask them to support a piece of legislation that would really, just be giving Israel more money. And all of that felt like, I didn't feel any kind of cognitive dissonance about it, right? I was like a Democrat and I was like pretty progressive in a lot of ways. But at the time, I didn't see any misalignment in like being pro-Israel and then caring about all the other issues that I cared about, when it comes to like climate and, women's rights and labor and all these things. I was like, to me, being pro-Israel means that I care about Jewish people and protecting Jews and, fighting against anti-Semitism. And that's a progressive value. So it all kind of made sense, right? Then I went to college, and I was really lucky to go to a place like UC Berkeley, which was, very like, in some ways, much more radical than the spaces I had grown up in here, and just a lot like more diverse and full of all sorts of kinds of people. And what really happened was like two things happened at once. I was a sophomore in college when Trump was elected, and I started to realize when he was elected that I was like doing all this pro-Israel work with some really concerning people who were very right-wing, Christian nationalists, Christian Zionist. And I was like, why am I in this space with all these Trump supporters? I thought you guys were all here because you cared about Jews. Clearly this guy, there's anti-Semites who support him. And also he's so harmful to everyone else I care about, immigrants. Like I grew up in a place like San Diego. Like I know how important immigration is here. I know, we used to be Mexico, right? I mean, it just, I started to be like, okay, why am I in this space with you all? And so started to like understand, it just started to form these cracks in my understanding of like why people are pro-Israel and why the US is so supportive of Israel. And then I also was just lucky that my world expanded, and at school I like became friends with people who were Palestinian and, was doing work in like human rights spaces. And I just started to really, I took an Arabic class, and like my world really expanded. And so I started to like learn the full history of what Israel means for Palestinians. And I also spent some more time in the West Bank. And so all of that together just kind of over the course of several years, like changed my perspective. But in the meantime, I was still, I like did stuff for Bernie in 2016 and then for Hillary in the primary. And then I graduated in 2019 and immediately moved to Iowa to go work on Kamala Harris's campaign because I had interned for her. So I had like a connection with her team. And I was like, we got to beat Donald Trump. I graduated right before the election. I was like, I'll like put my whole life on hold and go move to rural Iowa and actually like did a lot of organizing with the UAW 838 there because there's a big John Deere factory in town. And so they ran shit. And it was like, if you wanted to do anything, you had to go through the UAW. And I was like the only organizer that showed up to their meetings. And they'd be like, "Thank you for bringing so much diversity, Lily," because it was all men, and I was like, "You don't even know that I'm Jewish," like, just me at this table. But it was really fun, and I learned a lot, was there, and then went to Arizona when she dropped out of the race and worked on the kind of general election there, and that's how I ended up in the administration. Because when you work on a campaign and you win, you get kind of first access to the resume bank. And so I, sent my resume in November 2020, and then ended up in DC and was working at the Department of Interior for Secretary Holland, who is a really amazing person, was the first Indigenous cabinet secretary ever in the history of the United States. And Secretary of Interior is responsible for, everything that the U.S. government does with tribes. So it was really meaningful that she was leading that department, and that there were so many Native people who were actually finally like really in charge of the Bureau of Indian Health Services and the Bureau of Indian Education, and all these agencies that fund and like work with tribes that have not always actually had people from those communities in charge of that work. So that's kind of how I got there.
You were like molded at a young age.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think so. Yeah.
Like, your whole life has been political, involved in politics.
Yeah. I think, I remember when I was a kid, like, there's a Jewish holiday we have our New Year in the fall, and then right afterwards, this holiday called Yom Kippur people know it as like the most important one. It's maybe just the most serious one. It's, we don't have confession every week like, you do in Catholicism, but this is the one day a year where people like really confess, and you fast like people do in Islam on Ramadan. And so one of the things that my synagogue always did was like food drives on Yom Kippur, or leading up to it. Not on. They're not gonna make you like be around all this food, but leading up to Yom Kippur. And I remember like taking my little wagon. I was like a kid, and I would go around my community and like knock on people's doors and ask them if they had extra food. And I think for me, like, that kind of community service work, I always saw a connection to politics there, even though I know it doesn't always feel like that anymore. Like, actually helping your community and politics feel so separate at points. But to me, they always felt connected. And I think some of that is like, a deep sense of like thinking about history. And that's something that like Jewish people spend a lot of time thinking about history and, how things have happened, and just knowing that like, and the history of this country even too, like every movement for people's rights has started out with people just like organizing their communities. And I don't know, it sometimes feels a little naive, and I've been told that, right? But I have always felt like if you want to change things, politics can be a vehicle for that. Not always, but so that's why, I think when I was young, I was like, and as I've gotten older, of course, right, I've been in DC, and I've seen how ugly it can be, and I've seen how good it can be. So
what a journey. I mean, your backstory.
Yeah.
And what I think about is like, growing up, I grew up in San Diego too. My parents, your education was like, you went to college. We didn't think we had a choice. We just went. It was kind of like that, individualistic, and you need to make something of yourself. And your backstory, and then you're going all the way up to basically working for the President of the United States under the Secretary of Interior. And I'm sure when you said that to your parents, hey, this is what's going on, or you said this to your friends, or, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And that kind of like, that pride that your parents feel and your friends are just so stoked for you. And then all of a sudden you make a decision to resign because of your beliefs, and you're willing to give everything up, so to speak, for doing what's right. And so I'm sure it wasn't like, oh, your parents or your or your friends, they probably like, what are you doing? Just go. And so tell us a little about that, how like, you work so hard from a young age, and then all of a sudden you make this decision.
Yeah. Well, I think for any parent, quitting your job is probably like, not that's not the call they want to get. Yeah. And quitting your job on TV, also not great. And quitting a job like the job I had. Yeah. Especially I think for people who, I resonate with what you said, Chris, like going to college, getting an education, and then especially if you come from any kind of immigrant background, even if it's, for my family, it was 2 generations, like that was still the sense that you would give up all of the security and success that, your family like suffered for. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But the thing that it was definitely a decision that was not necessarily, super supported by a lot of people in my life. And some of that was also the like really intense, what's happening in the Jewish community right now is this kind of reckoning around Israel, right? And a lot of that is like a generational split between young people and our parents. And most of the people I grew up with, are kind of having these conversations with their parents about what they've always thought to be true, and how the idea, what they thought the state was is like not necessarily what it always has been. And, and even, of course, then like our role, right? The U.S., regardless really of where you stand or what you understand about the history, like the U.S. was violating its own laws in continuing to send Israel weapons and money for weapons because those weapons were being used to commit war crimes. And that's just, to me, that feels, that shouldn't be a controversial thing. That should be an easy thing for people to understand. And, there were so many people, I think, who could see that what the Biden administration was doing and continuing to support Israel and, make sure that there was no accountability whatsoever and enable this genocide was bad for Americans too, right? So regardless of if you cared about what was happening to the Palestinian people or not, which you should, but there were people that I think, I worked with in government who were much more cynical and kind of thought about things from an American foreign policy lens only and could see like, this is not good for us. But yeah, it was a decision that was like, it was a very easy decision to make from a kind of moral perspective, but it was very challenging, of course, right? And it was scary. I was 26, and in some ways, at the beginning of a career that I had worked pretty hard for, and felt very lucky to have access to power and opportunity in that way. But one of the things that I thought about a lot was how, like, my grandparents are not here anymore, but and I don't know if they would have really understood or been supportive, but I think that, these were people who came here and did not have opportunity or privilege or power at all. And one of the things that when in Jewish school and growing up, when you're Jewish, you learn about the Holocaust. And we're taught a lot about people who are called like righteous Gentiles, basically anyone who took a risk for Jewish people or people who were being persecuted by the Nazis and didn't have to, So there's famous people like Oskar Schindler and those folks, but there were lots of people who risked their careers, their jobs, their safety, their families' lives, even to hide people or to help people get out. And that those people are like the most, sort of spiritually righteous person, because you don't have to take that risk. It's not you, it's not your family, it's not your community, but you're doing that because that's the right thing. And I think like that's the type of, I hope that my grandparents, understand that they succeeded because I was able to be in a position where I could take risk and feel safe enough, right? And feel like I have enough of a safety net. I have a community, like I am not the people experiencing genocide right now, but I can risk my own XYZ for that. And that's like, to me, that's the American dream in a lot of ways,
The question was like, did you have pushback and people not supportive? But were there people that were supportive of
Absolutely.
you? Did you talk to people beforehand, before making the decision, and they were like, hey, we got your back and this and that?
Yes.
And gave you like that kind of strength? Or
Yes. It was not something that I could have done, and I didn't do it on my own totally, right? There were people who had my back, and even so before I resigned, like I think I've talked to you guys about this a little bit, or mentioned it to other folks, but there was a lot of organizing happening inside the federal government that was, mostly quiet. I mean, people didn't know about it, but there were, and of course, there's a federal workers union and there's a Capitol Hill union, but especially when you're an appointee, just like a political staffer for the administration, you can't unionize. Like you don't have really rights. I mean, you serve at the pleasure of the president. You're like lucky to be in that elite club, and you are really not supposed to rock the boat. And so there was all this kind of undercover organizing happening among people who worked in every agency of government, people who worked inside the White House, people who worked on Capitol Hill, and we were all trying to talk to each other and figure out, like, because people were really frustrated, if you worked on the Hill, your boss, a member of Congress, was getting calls every day from constituents who were like, what's going on? Why won't you say anything about Gaza? I'm sick of seeing these images, and I was already part of some Jewish community work with like groups like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace, who were doing that kind of solidarity work for Palestinians within the Jewish community. And so before I resigned, was like, we were organizing sign-on letters, anonymous letters, and people, counseling people on how to go talk to their boss if they worked in the State Department, and there was some like vigils that people did anonymous with their faces covered, and people went to some of the big marches in DC for Gaza as staffers, like with signs that said, I'm a Biden staffer, I'm a congressional staffer, and we demand a ceasefire. Again, like masked up, totally anonymous, but so being a part of that was like really empowering for me, because I was like, I know I'm not alone. There's so many of us who feel like this. And I think that gave me a lot of courage to be like, to take a public risk like I did. And then also, just knowing that I had other Jewish community, I had like people who would be supportive of me. And then when I did resign, it was challenging because there were a lot of people in my life who were not supportive, but I also gained like so many new people, and just knowing that, making new friends, and then even getting messages. Like I got a message from a journalist in the States whose family is from Gaza, and I think about it all the time. He told me like, what you did, when I show this to my family there, like it gives me hope that we will be able to build something better in the future, because they can see that like not every Jewish person is the Israeli army. And that kind of thing like gives you a lot of strength in a hard time.
Well, no one wrote a book about anyone that was safe, and when you're the first one, usually the people first, take the biggest hits.
Yeah.
And, we think about Martin Luther King, and we think about, but there's, when I hear your story, I think of like, the journalist that came saying there's no weapons of mass destruction,
Right.
and
Right.
and then what happened? MSNBC, Fox News, they chastised them, and then they're trying to, and Juan always talks about the Plato allegory of the cave, but they're trying to tell the truth, but they're being blocked. And but now, I learned, I think yesterday or the day before, that Rashida Tlaib is actually introducing legislation to Congress declaring a genocide.
Yep.
And that's huge. I mean, Juan and I and others were instrumental. Layla, I remember, Greg. I mean, just throw out everyone's name, but at the end of the day, it's like, we passed a resolution declaring a genocide in Gaza, and we were the first labor council to do that. So, and if it wasn't for you and people after you willing to, go on record and everything, so it's like Rashida wouldn't be doing this today if it wasn't for the people who were, standing up, and now they're like, oh well, they were right. I mean, I'm not going to mention anyone's names, but now I'm seeing people, saying, free Palestine on their website now after, so many years. So, or I think of Barbara Lee. Barbara Lee, we had her on our podcast. No big deal. Senator Barbara Lee, Congresswoman, but she said there was no weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
She went out. She was
She's
thing.
the only one.
She was the only vote.
She was the only vote. Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing with calling what's going on in Gaza. So people need to make a stand, and it's easy to be safe.
And those people like Barbara Lee, looking back at it, people are giving her props for taking that stance.
Right.
Like these people that probably back then would have been like, Barbara Lee, what are you talking about? This is terrorism and blah, blah, blah. And so I think, yeah, right now we're in the moment and people are deciding which side to be on and that kind of stuff. But 20 to 30 years from now, they're going to study this moment. They're going to look at the people that stayed silent, that didn't do anything about it. And then they're going to be like, damn, no wonder. Like, they're going to get chastised.
Yeah.
They're going to be on record. They're on record already. And so are we, though. Like, it's crazy how this whole week has been about sacrifice. That's what Chris Smalls talks about a lot. We had him on the podcast earlier this week. And he talks about, like, if he doesn't do it, then who is going to do it?
Yeah.
He hasn't seen anybody else in labor to jump on a flotilla to go to Gaza. So he had to do it himself. Things like that, like if you wouldn't have done it, and then maybe wouldn't have motivated other people to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So, but where people are at, I believe that this issue, the Gaza issue, is where people are at. If you remember last year, there was a non-committal a campaign, right?
Yeah. Uncommitted.
Yeah. Uncommitted. So when that was going on, do you think, or did you know that, were they taking that seriously at the White House? Like, did they just like brush it off and be like, this is nothing, we're still going to win, with their arrogance? Or did they take that uncommitted campaign seriously?
I think uncommitted was one of the only things, more than any of the protests, that got through to people, inside government. And ultimately that's because with this issue and with so many issues, but especially with this one, like, this is not a policy problem, right? The reason why there has been, continued U.S. support for Israel, regardless of how fascist their government gets and regardless of what kind of war crimes are committed, is political. It is because there are not enough, it's part of money in politics, and it's also because people don't trust or believe that they're going to get enough votes from people who are supportive of a policy change, right? And I have had conversations with members of Congress and other folks who say, like, unless you can bring me money or votes, nothing is going to change. And so I think that's why uncommitted did rattle people. I remember in like February, March of last year when there were the first primaries, and it started to really, make waves. That is when people were like, oh, are people actually not going to vote for Biden because of this? And I think there were a lot of people who were like, well, okay, but Trump is like so much worse. And that kind of logic to me, especially in the primary, was so, in some ways, like, infantilizing of voters and, people who, like, the whole point of uncommitted was to use the leverage of the primaries to be like, we have a choice right now, and we are going to show to you that, like, we are not going to make this choice. It wasn't saying, that we think Trump is better, right? But I think the fact that people, made these really, like, assumptions that regardless of what happened, everyone was just going to vote for Biden just because, to me shows, like, a real lack of, part of the problem with DC is that, people spend all these time just in that bubble and they're not actually, like, going out and talking to real people in their communities anymore. And, this, just because you're in DC and you're in this space, you're like, oh, well, we know, like, it would be impossible to change, to like AIPAC and all of these, we don't have the votes, blah, blah, blah. But, like, that's not how someone watching these videos every day on their phone is going to react. If you tell someone, well, I'm sorry, we just, like, have to keep being okay with these kids getting blown up because we just don't have the votes to change it. That's not, like, that doesn't make sense. No. And it shouldn't. And we shouldn't ask people to kind of, like, subsume their moral reaction so much. So yeah, I do think uncommitted really, unfortunately, I wish that they had been listened to more. I think, I was at the DNC when there was the sit-in outside the DNC and the real push to have this, Representative Rua, who's Palestinian, who's now running for governor in Georgia, to have her speak. And everyone was supportive of it. There was, like, the NAACP, I think AFL, a ton of unions, even like progressive and more Zionist Jewish organizations, J Street, et cetera, the hostage family parents who spoke at the DNC were also like, let her speak. I mean, everyone was just like, let this woman speak, give her a platform. I read her speech. It wasn't even that crazy, but it just, there were a few people in the campaign's ear who, said that this wouldn't be a good idea, that it would upset donors, blah, blah, blah. And I think that was a huge mistake. It was a really serious, oversight of because people are, especially when we're facing like fascism, people are looking for courage and they're looking for honesty. And even, if you don't have to be like a political genius to know that you want those things. And you don't have to know how all of the policy works and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not the voter's job. The voter's job is to tell their representatives what they want. And the job of people in power is to listen to that and make that happen and do all that, whatever policy work, et cetera. But I think Uncommitted was really important and really brave. And it did get in people's ear. And even if we didn't necessarily see that effect, like, I know people were talking about it, and I think it has had an impact on people who work in the DNC and in campaigns.
I was thinking about like the resolution for Rashida again, and to me, it's a gift.
Yeah.
For people who have been silent or haven't been, this is like she's extending, she's giving, because for a lot of people, there's no way out. But if they can get on board and say, this is something that I'm going to be supporting now that I have all the information, whatever they're going to say.
Right.
But Rashida's basically trying to save
Giving
people's lives with this resolution because, I remember we've had this woman named Gracie Torres who's running for county supervisors in Riverside County. But she said that she was there at the convention and after it, she said, you're going to lose. You're going to, because you're trying to like carve out what's going on, not mentioning the genocide, and it's like, that's not where people are at.
Yeah.
And I think some of that might be the arrogance of the people on top. Well, it doesn't matter. We're still going to win.
Right.
That doesn't work.
Or, people are like, and I think there's a little truth to like, okay, why are people going to care so much about something happening so far away? They care about their groceries and cost of living and health insurance. And that's true. People do care about all of those things here. But to not understand that we can connect the dots too of like, these are our tax dollars that are getting spent over there. And that is part of the reason why we don't have money for school lunches and SNAP benefits and health insurance and all that. I mean, it's just, it feels very arrogant and it feels very like disconnected. And I was, I ended up, I was doing some GOTV door knocking with Unite Here, the hospitality workers union outside of Philadelphia in November last year. And I remember talking to this woman and she told me, she was like, I don't like any of them. I was like, yeah, I get it. But I think at least with the Republicans, I know what I'm getting myself into. And I just feel like the Democrats are hypocrites. And I was like, let's talk about that. I mean, I understand, but like, what do you mean by that specifically? And she was like, I just, this whole, everything going on with Gaza, like they say they're the party of human rights and then they're okay with that. And it was really like, it really, it floored me and I totally understood what she was saying. But, again, and I kind of was like, well, I don't, that doesn't mean you should vote for Trump, but, because we're gonna be seeing some pretty severe human rights violations here, as we've seen with everything going on with the deportations. And I mean, we could, list it, but
we see all that.
Yeah.
So you have the libs, I guess you call them, and they're all about ICE. Even the AFL-CIO, they're doing a great job on it.
Right.
But you can't talk about that and not talk about the genocide in Gaza.
Right.
So it's like, you're talking about human rights. This is all
connected.
It is all connected.
Yeah.
So it is, I think, like courage. People do need to stand up. Hey, I've been called in the office, but at the end of the day, it's like I'm willing to risk my job. I'm willing to risk my life for the labor movement. And it's a labor issue because they bombed all the schools, the hospitals, all this thing. You know,
Every university.
It makes me so upset when people say this is not a labor issue, because it just shows like they're not really paying attention. They're still, you know, in the cave, not realizing there's a whole nother reality outside the true reality.
Right.
Yeah, and I wasn't thinking of bringing this in, but I'm gonna bring it in. Like, there's so we're not consistent with that. It's not a labor issue, whatever excuse. With the whole Ukraine thing that was going on, there were labor unions donating to the Ukraine military or whatever for weapons and that kind of stuff. IATSE donated. I was at our GEB. I'm telling you, we're risking everything. And why is that a labor issue then? Why is that an issue for us, Ukraine?
Right.
Why is in Gaza a labor issue? You know what I mean? It's not consistent. At least if they didn't donate to Ukraine, then they can at least have that. But they don't
They
have
could
that.
say we don't do foreign,
Exactly.
you know,
And then that'll make
international
sense.
issues. Yeah.
That'll make sense.
Yeah.
But okay, I think this is where the people are at. When we passed a resolution here in San Diego, calling it a genocide on apartheid state, condemning what the IOF did to Chris Smalls. Like we took a picture of a few of us and I posted it on social media and a little caption. It got so much views and likes. I've never gotten that many likes. And that's where people are at. That's what that shows me. We shot videos, we shot clips and pictures, and that was getting a lot of attention. And that's where I think people on social media, especially the young people, they're like, oh, this is what labor is what unions are. Maybe they are what they say they are. What you said earlier about that woman that you met when you were canvassing, and she said, yeah, the Democrats say they're about social justice and human rights, but then they do this. That's the same thing with the AFL. They sent the rep in to stop us from passing this resolution. We saw Liz Schuler the next day on MSNBC talking about being authoritarian. Trump is an authoritarian figure, and he's here squashing democracy. When she's sending a rep to squash democracy on us, you know what I mean? So we can clearly see Liz Schuler's hypocrisy, the AFL's hypocrisy. Like, why isn't this your issue? You know what I mean? So there's a similarity here. Like, the AFL is doing the mistake that the Democratic Party just did last year. And that's where I think by us passing this resolution here in San Diego, we're saving the labor movement from itself. Like, we're giving that opportunity that you said that you were talking about, that Rashida Tlaib is doing that petition or whatever, is like, hey, now it's an opportunity. If you haven't said anything, now's the time to step up and say something about it. But the AFL still hasn't taken a stance, but our goal is to get them to eventually take a stance. But going back to, that's where the world is on this issue. Look what's going on right now with the right. They're fragmenting. All of them. They're all the MAGA is breaking apart so fast. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Thomas Massey. These were big MAGA people when Trump was elected. They helped him get elected. And now look at them. They broke away from him. And I see on social media, because I follow a lot of these people, a lot of these big names are breaking away from MAGA and Trump. One of the biggest issues is the genocide. Candace Owens, whatnot. And we normally don't drop these names on the podcast, but this is where the whole country is at. Even people on the right. I start seeing people on the right talking about, hey, you know what? I'll partner up with liberals on this one. So do you see this as maybe an opportunity for labor and unions and workers to come together as workers to stop this genocide? You know, like Chris Small said earlier this week, the one thing that unites us all is that we're all workers. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think people are realizing that, you know, it's not necessarily, I mean, there are some things that, right, we can say it's still left versus right, but it's really about like top versus bottom, right? And that, you know, folks like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? I think she has said some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
She said some crazy stuff about Jews. She said some horrible stuff about all kinds of people. But like someone like that, you know, I mean, Thomas Massey, right? I think those people like came into Congress as part of a like anti-establishment wave within the Republican Party that was, happened like over the last 10 years. And some of those people are genuinely, when they say something like America first, they mean it as let's put our resources towards American people. And we can disagree with them about like, maybe they define Americans differently, right? They might not always be thinking like immigrants and Black and brown people, and right. And that's like where I think we can't let that their definition of American become the one that we also use. But I think there is a genuine sense that that you're talking about, and people who are veterans who are like, they know what it's like to get shipped off to war and then come back and have no access to healthcare and not be taken care of by the government at all. I have friends whose parents, like, their dads have had all sorts of illnesses and they can't get their VA benefits, and the VA won't let them prove that it's from their service. My dad has disability from his time in the Air Force. And I think people are realizing, like, why are we spending so much money, on war, and when those resources need to be used for people at home, and also just that it's morally wrong to kill children and commit war crimes and completely decimate a community and a people, and that doesn't make Jews safe, right? I think it's just like the logic there is if you're telling me, if anything, it makes us more unsafe. If people think, oh, if I care about Jewish people, then I have to be okay with, killing hundreds of thousands of people, like something doesn't add up there. And I do think this is a real opportunity for like people to, and not just on this issue, but on everything, kind of change how we think about like safety and solidarity, that it doesn't have to be a trade-off, right? Of like, for me to be safe and have resources and have and thrive, then someone else doesn't get to. With this issue, we have a chance to just like reframe that for everyone, right? For everything. And I think that applies to so many things going on here at home too, because the root of like so much of this xenophobia and racism towards immigrants that has manifested in like the kidnapping and deportation and the crimes that ICE is committing is rooted in this idea that's like manipulated by politicians and people in charge, that okay, people are genuinely feeling scared and like they're not able to make ends meet, and that they're not going to be able to like take care of their families and live a good life. And then they're told, and the reason for that is these other people, or that we have to somehow decide, like either you can have that, but then this other group of people can't. But that's not true. And we know that's not true because we're the richest country in the history of the world, and everyone here could have access to like education and a house. Honestly, could probably buy a house if our resources were actually distributed, and be able to go to the doctor and have enough money to go on vacation and buy things that you want for your kids and buy things that you want for yourself. And we know that that's all possible, but there are people who own like 10 yachts. And then there's like Jeff Bezos, right? And Elon Musk. And why should those people be able to hoard resources and wealth in a way that makes them so insanely rich? Like, what are they even going to do with all that money? I mean, these people have more, they could never even spend all of it, right?
I think the American people are like connecting the dots, because
Yes.
you hear, Israel, like how their healthcare system, where they all have it.
Right.
And in the United States, not everyone has healthcare.
Yeah.
And, and on this podcast, we always talk about the main thing is to keep the main thing, kitchen table economics. And so I think in a way, people are feeling lied to when they say we can't afford healthcare. Of course,
we always have money for war.
We always have. So it's not in the younger generation. I'll go out on a limb here. I think the younger generation is a lot smarter now.
Yeah.
And they're looking at things, and they're like the first generation to have access to the internet their entire lives. So they're seeing everything going on. They get like, okay, so that doesn't make sense. They'll be nice about it, but they're like, that doesn't make sense.
Well, we're also, I guess I'm not, there's a generation younger than me who's also now like, sometimes I see, kids in college and I'm like, oh my God, like you're so young. I'm, 10 years older than you. But when you grow up in the shadow of all these crises, right? Like growing up with school shooter drills and the pandemic and like 2008, and it makes sense that all of the things that our parents were told about, you work, you'll be able to afford a house, like you put in your time, you go to school, you get all that, you'll have some student loans, but like it's not going to be crazy. I mean, I think my parents went to college for like $3,000 a semester or something like that, which was, that was more money at that time. But if that was how much school costs now, I mean, that would be like a game changer. And we just see that contract has been broken, like that all of those things are not going to guarantee you even the ability to just like feed yourself, right, and put a roof over your head. But then at the same time, we always have money for war. We always have money to bail out banks. We always have money to help rich people not pay taxes, right? And yeah, I think it's a lot of people my age and younger are just like, we see that the system is deeply broken, and that makes people more vulnerable too, right? To be like radicalized. The people are always talking about like young men getting radicalized to the right, and I think something that a lot of people in Washington don't understand is that, when people are vulnerable, if you are not giving them something to believe in and showing, giving them like a way to believe that their life is going to be better, then whoever's the first person to do that, they're going to support that person. Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the youth, in the election this month, there was a lot of victories with Democrats and across the country. Does the Mamdani victory kind of give you hope? Speaking of hope, he brought out the youth.
Mm-hmm.
I think his biggest voter base was 18 to 30 year olds,
29,
which are the people that normally don't come out to vote, is the youth. So with that, do you think that's a game changer for us? Maybe that's something that Democrats can learn about, like his campaign, that it was resonating. He ran on solid economic issues, like freezing the rent, capping the rent prices going up, bus rides for free. He's talking about housing. He's talking about healthcare. He's talking about, he even talked about Israel, like arresting Netanyahu if he steps foot in New York. But that was more of the New York first. Like his mindset was, I just care about New Yorkers right now.
Yeah.
Like economics, and it's about his people, his voter base.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that victory kind of gives you hope?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think it was, he won like over 1 million votes, which is more than a mayor has won in New York since like the 60s, something like that.
Damn.
Yeah. I was lucky, I got to go do some canvassing for him and spend some time in New York, before the election, and just like seeing, like I've knocked on a lot of doors for campaigns and I've been a part of a lot of campaigns, and I've never felt people so excited about someone, and all kinds of people too, right? It was really beautiful to see. Like I saw, this Bangladeshi family who was voting, and they were just like, so you can tell like people have never felt so seen and heard by someone running for office. But I think it's a model that a lot of people will say like, oh, it's because he's charismatic and young and handsome and good at social media. And that's just like one part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, like we should be running people who are actually like people that you want to hang out with, and not like people who, are, old people can be great, but it should be like a normal person, right? That someone you want to actually engage with. And it should, like, we need to run people who are good communicators, all that. But like, it was also about the substance. And that's what I think a lot of people will try and ignore and say, like, it's not about the affordability or the, whatever. It's just about like, we have to be really good at making TikTok reels and have like some, young, handsome person. And that's just one part of it. Like people liked him because he was speaking to the issues that they care about. And because, like you said, he was focusing on New Yorkers, and also being like consistent and authentic. And so that consistency, like when it comes to talking about Israel, you can see that he's like going to be consistent in how you can tell when someone has like a good moral core, and that they think about politics and they want to be in politics for the right reasons because they genuinely care about people, and that they're going to kind of take that and apply it to every issue, and not, I think it was Ta-Nehisi Coates who said something about like, if you can't stand up for the genocide, then what can you stand up against? And I think people really feel that right now, of like, how is someone supposed to stand up to Trump and authoritarianism and fascism here if you are going to waver on it when it comes to, it happening abroad.
Schuler.
Well, I think I think losers are gonna say, hey, it's because he's good looking. I go, my grandma always said, beauty is only skin deep, but ugliness is to the bone. And I think
Smart lady.
the new generation right now, they are looking for substance. They're looking for courage. They see it when they see someone who's consistent, who keep not going. We gotta work on the ICE problem, but not say anything about the genocide in Gaza. No,
Right.
he's saying
Or we got to throw trans people under the bus.
There you go.
But fight ICE. Like,
Yeah.
what if we did both? We don't have not do both, but like we don't have to choose right between some people having rights and freedom and others. That kind of inconsistency, because it's like we know what happens when if you're not free, then I'm not free. And I think people feel that, like, in their core, they understand that. And I think they're just like, it's harder to convince people that they have to make that choice of, okay, I have to be okay with this happening to my neighbor, and somehow that'll mean it'll never happen to me. Like, no, that means it's more likely to happen to you if it can happen to them.
Yeah, I think I always try to compare these things like what goes on in politics with like organizing drives or organizing workers. I'm a union organizer. I do think that people up top, like Washington, D.C., Sacramento, these people are very disconnected from the people, from the workers, from the constituents, because they're over there. They know better. They pay these consultants millions of dollars, and they know better than everybody else. Similar to CEOs and management in corporations. One of the campaigns that I ran a few years ago, like I turned in 71% of the cards, but I had people on the inside, of course, telling me information of what management was talking about. They thought when we filed and we went public, they thought we only turned in 30% because 30% is the bar, is a minimum that you can turn in to initiate a union election. So they thought like, it's probably 30% of the workers that sign these cards. You don't have to worry about it. And so they were doing their anti-union campaign. They use videos from the 1980s. They don't really change their tactics at all. And they think they're going to win that way. And I didn't turn in 30%. I turned in 71% because they always underestimate the workers. They always think they're too stupid to organize, that they don't know their rights, or they don't know any better. And they don't have any courage to do something like this, to stand up against the bosses. We know better. So I think of that the same thing as with politicians. They treat us like we're just dumb, that we owe them our votes, that like our votes are not, they don't have to campaign for our votes.
Yeah.
That they take us for granted, and that's what happened, I think,
They can
last
just
year.
go talk to their donors and, I mean, how many, I don't know, like when was the last time someone in Congress actually like went and knocked on the door of every single person in their district and was
Never.
like, hey, I mean, maybe, but yeah, I can't imagine that. And that's like Zoran's campaign. He was knocking doors, they knocked 3 million doors across New York City.
That's insane.
Insane. But that's like, I know that, people don't always like someone coming to their door now. I feel like we all get so many calls and texts and, but there is, I mean, you have to actually go talk to people where they are. And I think that it's the same. I mean, it's kind of our whole system is designed to just keep people like struggling to just keep their heads above water so much that they can't, they can't have time to think about anything else. And that's kind of the assumption that bosses make, that, CEOs make, that people in power make, that, and I've seen it. You work on campaigns and the only people who have time to volunteer are like retired people and students, and that sucks, because you should be able to, like, if you're working and you're, taking care of your kids and your older parents and paying your bills, like, you should, even in all that, have time and energy to do fun stuff for yourself and then also get involved in your community. But most people don't have that. And I think the fact that people still, like, even despite how hard it is to survive right now, still organize and still, like, take risks to stand up to their bosses and take time to go be a part of their community, and like, and even if that just means like voting or going to one meeting, right, or doing one thing, like, I think that that shows that the assumption that these people are making is wrong, right? That like that people are, like you said, too stupid or too tired or too overwhelmed to care. Like, people are still gonna care. they're still going to care. And I think that idea, I hope it's resonating. I think with some people are starting to understand that, like, people in campaigns, at least in politics, that they have to
Well, the
different.
Democratic Party spent over $20 million researching how they lost the mail vote.
Right.
And I'll tell them right now, like, they can give me $1 million and I'll just give them the answer. Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Give me $1
That's a
million.
deal.
Yeah, and I'll sit down with you for a whole day.
Just pay our rent for a
Yeah,
year.
pay our rent.
Right.
Get us a new
Well,
studio.
Zoran did really well with young men.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's there's part of the answer, guys. Like, but there's a lot of people who won't want to hear that because it would mean that they have to be, DoorDash and Uber and like every billionaire in New York tried to take down Zoran, right?
Mm-hmm.
And propped up Andrew Cuomo. Even people who say that they're Republicans and Democrats, right? We're all like, if they were rich, most of them, they were working to get Cuomo elected.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the problem is that there's a lot of people in the Democratic Party who are just as beholden to the same, corporations that put someone like Trump in power. So they're never going to be able to stand up to him or any of these other people. And they're not going to want to listen when someone says, hey, one of the ways you win young men is you like run on affordability and run on actually tackling some of the systems that are causing young men to have unemployment, which is making them depressed and, lonely and like feel like they don't have hope or a future. But people, that means you have to stop taking your check from Palantir, guys. That means that the DCCC has to stop lobbying SpaceX. Don't take money from those guys.
There's Chris Smalls, when he was on the podcast yesterday, he talked about people power, solidarity. And I think that is something the billionaires and millionaires, that something is just so valuable about people coming together. I mean, Chris Smalls, who and some others took on Amazon, this big behemoth, and everyone's saying, "Yeah, you're never going to succeed." Another union tried to organize, they lost, and he was like, no, and he's not doing the same things that old organizers are doing. He's just he's camping in front of the locations. He's you got to watch the episode, but he's talking about how he was needed to get cards signed, so he was smoking out in the tent, just like solidarity. Some people are like found out, they're all going. I mean, there's a rule. You can't actually say, hey, give me my vote, I'll give you, but there's a
building community.
But if you're just hanging out, and it's just like, those are the things that people are looking for. And what did he do? He was able to. And of course, after he wins, all the naysayers, oh my gosh, great job. Bernie Sanders, AOC, you could talk about Biden invited him to the White House. Mm-hmm. Of course, when he gets, abducted, crickets.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why Juan and I got that resolution. You're like, what the fuck? Why aren't people saying anything?
Yeah.
People are looking for courage right now. And they need people like you. They need people like Mamdani to take a stand. I mean, I remember watching the debate. Remember, they asked him, "What are the first thing you're going to do when you become?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to stay here in New York." Everyone's saying pretty much the same talking points that they've done, but it's like people like that. People like that authenticity.
Because you're the mayor of New York.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
That's your job to stay in New York and fight for people in New York.
New Yorkers. This week we had that action, and you came out to the ICE out of San Diego. You mentioned it earlier that labor is really good with ICE. The ICE issues, of course, we're good at it. But then, like, labor is not that good with the genocide, but we freaking crashed the party. There's a weekly ICE out of San Diego action that happens here in San Diego in front of the federal building. And it's about ICE, getting ICE out of San Diego. There's a bunch of orgs that are part of this, some politicians and unions, of course. And they're really good at that issue. And we crashed the party. We brought you and Chris Moss to it and kind of gave them an earful about the genocide and trying to link these two issues together. That's been one of our goals here in San Diego, is to link the two issues. Like, you can't just say one thing about ICE, that they're fascists, that they're ruining communities here in San Diego, that they're abducting everybody, and not say anything about the genocide. Like Chris Small said, he said you can't just have one foot in and one foot out. You have to have both feet in. So,
Yeah.
like, tell me about your experience at that action. Like, first of all, thank you for coming out and speaking there at that
course.
action. But, like, how do we do better at linking both of these issues together? It's so important to us here in San Diego. We're half foot in as a labor movement, but we need to get that other foot in. How do we get that other foot in all the way in to talk about the genocide as much as we talk about ICE?
I think some of it is about, right, like how are we spending our resources and our capacity. You know, it's like if you look at our budget and however much, you know, of the US government's budget is for the military, right? Then that's like, right. Some people say, especially, you know, San Diego's a military town, like there's a lot of people here who are in the military or veterans or, you know, work kind of adjacent to it. Like, yeah, that creates jobs and all of that, but it also is like money for war ultimately and weapons. And that's, well, we're spending that, you know, those weapons are going to be used against people abroad, right? And do we really need to be spending over half of our resources on war and weapons, even if they're creating jobs here? What if we created like a Green New Deal jobs program, you know, or all of the other things that people know actually affect their day-to-day lives and that we clearly don't, you know, have enough, like when I was driving here and it was raining and I was just like seeing how impacted the roads are, right? And flooding and, you know, like infrastructure, all of the money that could be used to work on our roads just so that people cannot, what is it? You know, I think most Americans have like less than $400 in an emergency savings account. If one of your tires goes out, that's like $100. Two of your tires goes out, that's at least, I mean, right? There goes your savings, you know? So I think if for people who are not already kind of, you know, understanding like, oh, that's happening so far away, why should I care about this when people are getting abducted right here, right? That's like one way to link it. And also just that ICE and, you know, it's the same tactics that are used against Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza are like used by ICE against people here, right? And so these things like it's called the boomerang effect. Nora Ericott has written about that a lot. She's a Palestinian lawyer, but people talk about it with just kind of empire in general, that like what is used against people somewhere else is going to eventually be brought back and used against people inside the you know, the country that is like doing that abroad. And so we're seeing that kind of same thing. And organizers have been talking about this since Ferguson, right? When they were trying to connect like what was happening with the police against people protesting in 2014 and 2020 with the same tactics that like the IDF uses, you know, to do riot control and suppress Palestinians from not even just organizing, but from like existing.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was in the Marines. I've been deployed twice. I've been deployed to Afghanistan, and the M8AVs, those Humvees, and those big old armored vehicles that we were using over there, our vests, our machine guns, our M16s, M4s. Then I come back here to the States, and I'm like, why do we have these?
Why do the cops have?
Why do the cops have these? Yeah. Like, what the fuck is going on here? To me,
right.
It's like we can be using these resources for healthcare, for the homeless, for building bridges and roads, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, just like last January, I think it was, when it rained pretty hard here in San Diego, it flooded.
Yeah.
Southeast San Diego. Like flood. People lost their homes, their apartments. They got kicked out of them, and it was bad. There's a lawsuit against the city of San Diego. That's awesome, and it's because like, why aren't we spending our resources on things that matter to us here in the U.S.
And it's our taxes.
And it's our tax dollars.
You know?
Imagine the $1 trillion budget that we're going to have for the military next year. Maybe 40 billion goes to every major city. 1 billion for this city, 1 billion for that. What would it do for us?
And that $1 trillion like military budget is also, it's not just going to be used against people in other countries like that. We're seeing that is going to be used the National Guard. You know, I mean, the level of like policing and suppression of dissent, you know, that people in Chicago are like in the streets fighting against ICE and the National Guard and getting brutalized and beat up. I know that's been happening here in LA and you know, I think probably here to some extent, but that money that we're spending, I think it costs, like, I might not be totally right on the numbers here, but I think it costs like the average American taxpayer $36 a year for SNAP and EBT and those kind of like food benefits. And it costs us like $5,000 a year, the military budget. So that's like how much money from our taxes on, you know, on average is going to that. That's crazy, you know. And then people are trying to convince people that it's like costs you so much money to that SNAP and these things are like wasteful. And I mean, $30 a year, I'm fine with that.
I think that that's what they want. They want you talking about the SNAP benefits. Confusion is control.
Yeah.
And if they're able to distract you, 60% of the people, more than that, are living paycheck to paycheck. But if they have you all, you know, focused on the SNAP benefits, or they have you look, I always say, if you saw a grass blowing in the wind, right? Every single blade of grass makes its own sound, right? And if we had to listen to every single blade of grass, the sound would be deafening. But those are all the problems of the world. And I think anyone who wants to win, if they put a spotlight on kitchen table economics, connect the dots, people are doing it. Now, they don't want you to do it. They want you to you know, infight. They want you to argue about things that no one's going to agree on completely. Could be abortion. It could be affirmative action. You know, and I use this example like when I was on the picket line for 4.5 months. This was 20 years ago. There was a guy named Nathan Thurns, and he was pro-life, and at the time I was pro-choice, and we would go back and forth on, because you know when you're on the picket line, you just talk. You're just talking holding picket signs. And so, but he was out there on day one, and 4.5 months later, he was out there on day 139. And it wasn't like our political views that, you know, kept us together. It was the labor movement. Because we all were doing something together. And I think that's why you see Marjorie Taylor, is that her name? You know, you're seeing people come together for doing something that's right. And I think the people who aren't are just scared. And they're saying, hey, I'm going to lose these votes. I can't say anything. I got to keep my mouth shut. Now, all of a sudden, Rashida Tlaib is putting this resolution together, and now it's like, no, this is where people are at. Were you the one that told me the left is prophetic?
I think I did.
Okay. So
a few months ago.
And so all this, you know, they see what's going on. I see the younger generation, those, we call them honey badgers. They're growing up. Okay. And they're going to be running the show, and they are going to look back to see who was not speaking out.
Right. And also just, I mean, that made me think, like, you know, thinking about how do we connect these things, like, on just a spiritual level. Like, I really do think about how we are all connected, and like the web of mutuality, right? That if something happens to someone else, like it's happening to me too, in some way. Because that's you know, all of our cells are connected. I mean, that's how nature works. You know, everything needs each other, and is like, and we are a part of that, no matter, like, you know, how disconnected sometimes we feel. And I think that is like, people talk about the loneliness epidemic, and people are feeling like so disconnected from each other. But we need to like create a kind of new politics that really like understands that. And so it's like, even if something is happening to people really far away, like if we allow that to happen and we support it and we fund it, that is happening to us, right? And that kind of, even on just like a spiritual level, is like hurting us and creating, you know, a kind of politics of death that is like eventually something that can hurt us. And any system, I think I said this in my resignation letter, where I was, you know, and people even would ask me sometimes before I resigned, like, you're Jewish, like, why do you care so much about this? And like, you know, I'm like, I care about this because any system that is like based on oppression or harm is bad for all the people involved in it, right? And that's where, you know, if I do genuinely, I care about my like Israeli friends and family, and I want them to be safe, and that means that they shouldn't have to live in a society that forces them to go to the army at age 18, right? And like militarizes them and makes them oppressors of another people, because that will eventually come back to hurt them, and that also like creates a kind of spiritual decay for them as well. And I think that like people across party lines, right, and across different like issues can understand and connect to that basic thing that like we all do need each other, and we all need to like work together. And that's where like something like, you know, I do think unions understand that in a way that maybe more so than any other kind of force or like community in this country, because there's this history of like working together on something, even if you disagree on a bunch of other things, and knowing that you need each other to make this happen, because you can't go on strike by yourself.
Yeah, I an example of that I have, when I was organizing this company and we were shooting videos like for propaganda purposes. Freaking, there's a fly right here. Get some. Like when we were done filming, this one guy, his name is Brandon. He's such a nice guy. He's an actor, so he's.
I know
You
Brandon.
remember
Yeah,
Brandon.
Hilston. Yeah.
He told me, you know, before we started this campaign, because there was a lot of different hotels in this company had different properties, like 24, so the workers were spread out. He's like, before this campaign, I felt alone. I felt like I was the only one that felt exploited, and I deserved more money. I deserved better benefits and working conditions. But by this campaign, it brought us all together, and I feel that I'm not alone in this fight.
It's beautiful.
And we could do something about it. So this created this family that I never thought can exist before. So like you're saying, that labor unions have that. With our formula is solidarity. Our formula is coming together and taking on Goliath. It's a David and Goliath story. But we're not David as one individual. We're David as we are all together in on this. And that's the only way we could defeat Goliath. You can't defeat Goliath by yourself. Like I tell the guys all the time, go to your boss right now and ask him for a raise. I'm sure you guys all have done that. And they're going to tell you to kick rocks. But if you all come together and say and demand that you need a raise, that's a different conversation. They're going to listen to you. They can't afford to lose all of you all at the same time. Our greatest strength is our labor and our money. So if you withhold your labor from the company, they're not going to be able to operate. They're not going to be able to work and make profit. And that's what they do. That's why they exist. So that collectivism mindset, I think it is shifting here in the U.S. I think, yeah, we're an individualistic country. We're not like Japan or Mexico that they're collective societies. We're individualistic. We're bootstraps and that kind of stuff. So I think maybe the mindset is shifting here in the U.S. because I think the big factor is social media. Social media has brought us together in a way that we didn't have that kind of connection before. Or we can see people in Japan have relationships and video games, where we're constantly building relationships with other people across the world now. We're like, hey, it doesn't have to be like this.
We can also tell, we know that people in Europe can have, like can get a surgery for $50, right?
Yeah.
And we just like you're saying, we know that it doesn't have to be this way, right? And that like it is possible to have a different way of life and a different system and a different society. There's a lot of challenges to building that, but I think as long as we can maintain like some sense of hope that it is possible, and that's what like fascism really relies on, people being afraid, and that's like what everything that has happened in the last, how many months has it been? 11 months, it has been to try and scare people. Even just when they have the National Guard walking down the street, right? Like that's to scare people, and people getting arrested by ICE, like that's all of it is fear. And it's going to take a lot to like overcome the natural fear to like hide, to not talk to your neighbors, right? To like stay separated and individual. But the only way to fight against any of this is to like kind of move through that fear, and also like know that you have each other's backs, right? And to keep like creating community, and that's the real counterweight. And then also, I think something like the elections last week, like showing that you can win, that we can win, is like, I know a lot of people feeling a lot more hopeful now, you know, because it's like, okay, it's possible for, I mean, just the fact that like the mayor of New York is Muslim is like, I think 20 years ago that would have felt impossible, right? And there's, I forget how many, but like, you know, I think 1 million, or there's a lot of Muslim people in New York, right? Who like deserve to feel that kind of representation and to be seen like that. And again, right, every single corporation and pretty much every single billionaire tried to defeat him, and they still didn't win. And that's like, that makes me feel really hopeful and optimistic about what we can do.
Yeah, I think I always say people are finding their fiery furnace, you know, because I know I've told you the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they defied the king, and Nebuchadnezzar was so pissed off, he threw them in the fiery furnace. But they believed in their God, and they were willing to die, risk their life, lose everything for their beliefs. And I think can be metaphorical too. It's like, okay, the right thing would be to declare a genocide. What is going on? What is wrong? But they're all, oh, you know, I might lose my job. So it's like people are standing up, and you know, Zoran, you know, he obviously spoke his mind, and he believed what he was doing is right. And you can tell people are authentic. You can just tell when people are just like believe what they believe in. Yeah. And when you fail to do what's right, you actually die a little inside. And when Martin Luther King said, you know, you might be 49 as I happen to be, but you might live to be your 90, but you're just as dead at 90 as you would be at 49 if you didn't do what was right. And so I think that's when you really live, when you get out of the cave, when you see things for what they are. Like Juan always likes to
Chris,
say.
you're stepping on my allegory of the cave.
On your metaphor.
Yeah, like I love talking. We brought it up, or I brought it up during the Chris Smalls episode, and everybody loved that one. Yeah, everybody was like talking about getting red pilled and this and that, and that's what we're doing is red pilling people, is giving them the red pill, as in we're just messengers here. As an organizer, I'm just a messenger. I'm not the worker that's organizing. I'm not the worker that would be under this contract or facing these issues. I'm just a guy that's connecting dots, and I'm just a messenger. They're the ones that are actually organizing. You just give them the tools to organize. That's what the role of the organizer is to be a messenger. And what Chris Smalls is doing, he's just a messenger. He's going around city to city, country to country to talk about his experience and being able, with him and his solidarity with his coworkers, defeating Goliath. He's spreading that, and it gives people hope. When we took him to TJ, or well, you didn't, but me and Meshgan took him to TJ. Yeah, Chris doesn't have a passport still.
It's expired.
It's expired.
Gotta get on that.
We took him to TJ to meet those organizations down there that are doing really good work, and they felt inspired. And he was speaking English, and a lot of them didn't speak English, but still, just they got it translated. He's inspiring them in their country. You know what I mean? So this is, we don't know our reach, like Chris likes to say, that we don't know our reach. The things that we say on this podcast, who knows who is inspiring and helping, and what Chris did and what you did by quitting the Biden administration. You made it. You were at the mountaintop, right? Like there's nothing there, I guess. Chris likes to say that, is that right now we're on the right up on the podcast. Like we just grow and get different guests, and people are starting to realize who we are. But he's like, but once we make it, man, there's nothing there.
Yeah. Once you get to the top, there's nothing there.
Yeah. Like that. So it's kind of like, damn, what the fuck is going to be up there for us, Chris? Nothing. So, but by you quitting and that Biden administration, you made it, and you still did what you did because maybe you feel like there's still something more. And maybe that's not your ultimate goal, is to end up there. And you don't want that to be your legacy, is be part of this administration that was facilitating or contributing to a genocide. But what are your next moves? What are you up to now? What are you working on now, if we're allowed to ask that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm figuring that out a little too. You know, I think you know, like you said, it's also I was on a very specific like career track. You know, you work in campaigns and then you're in the administration, and I could have kind of kept climbing in that government staffer route. But and then when I quit, I was like, okay, you know, got pulled into all of this other stuff, and you know, felt like I have had kind of like a crash course in all these other things I could do. But the reason I got in politics in the first place was like pretty rooted in organizing, and you know, I talked about being in Iowa, and that was like, even though electoral organizing there's a lot of flaws, and I had like I felt like I came out of the campaign system or season, and I was like, I could write a book on like all the things that I think we should do differently. But at the end of the day, it was those experiences of like getting people involved. You know, I had some volunteers who had like never done anything except voting, right? And now one of them was like a chief of staff for a city council member in Tucson. And then another one was like leading this whole effort to clean up like some nuclear waste when I was in Arizona. And that's like so meaningful to me. And I think I've spent a lot of time the last year like doing some kind of like fundraising stuff for different campaigns, and like helping out with Zoran's election in that way, and you know, talking to rich people and trying to get them to give money to someone like him, or you know, be a part of these movements. But I feel like my heart isn't like super in that. When at the end of the day, I'm like, what got me excited about what's the thing that like has made me feel the most fulfilled? And it's always been organizing. And so I'm like starting to pivot again a little bit of like, okay, how do I actually get back involved in doing more work and really building people power? Because it's not going to come from, you know, from the top.